Hello, Liverpool fans. Welcome to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. Coach Ralph and I are excited to bring you this podcast. From games to players to club news, we cover everything LFC. You can find us on every platform and YouTube. Please take a second to follow or subscribe to the podcast. That way, you know when the latest podcast is up. Thank you for listening, and now on to the show. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Salim, and I'm joined by Coach Ralph, my other co-host. Coach, how you doing? We missed you last week.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm in South America, but still following the Reds avidly day to day.
Yeah, today's discussion is about the coaches, but before we get into that, Coach, did you get a chance to see the Liverpool Real Betis game?
I watched the highlights of the game. I didn't see the entire match, so yeah, it's always difficult from these preseason games to take away too much from it, particularly with I think there were 10 senior players missing, and then a couple of the top academy players that made an impact last year. So you're talking 12 players in total, and of course, the manager threw on pretty much his academy team in the second half.
Yeah, a couple highlights from that game. Curtis Jones picked up a knock in like the 15th, 16th minute, and Trey Neone came in. Mm-hmm. And my God, he is a talent. He looked right at home, did not look phased. I know it's not a full-blooded, intensive match, but he really shined in that performance as a defensive midfielder. I thought he was very good. Connor Bradley was fantastic, and Ben Doak just was skipping around that defender on the right-hand side. He looked fantastic too. So we, again, three more prodigies. I mean, Connor played excellent last year. Ben Doak, we know about him. But Trey Neone at 17 years old just looked fantastic and had a big, big say in the goal.
Right. And look, there's no question that Liverpool have talent, and in contrast to some of their peer clubs, look as though they're prepared to look to them a little bit more. So be interesting to see how things pan out in the slot.
Yeah, last week Jeff and I discussed some incoming transfers, and as we were kind of talking about it, and I know, Coach, you mentioned this several times, that the team really doesn't need much. There was one guy that finally, after we kind of boiled everything down, that we thought would be a good fit for the team, and it's Youssef Fofana from Monaco. He's a 25-year-old French international and is just a big, strong lad and very good skills, but looks like he's going to AC Milan, and West Ham actually just put a bid in for him and got rejected. But, we also threw out the Nicola Barellas and stuff like that, stuff that in the frameworks of FSG probably wouldn't work. But Fofana, for being around 30 million euros, 35 million euros, kind of fits the mold. He's 25. He's maybe a little bit older than what they would want. But he's a fantastic player, and it was a fun exercise. But let's get on to this week's topics about coaches, Liverpool coaches. And, Coach, we're going to start with Bill Shankly.
Right. So, and without being too picky, just to correct you, Arne Slot is actually the first coach that Liverpool have had. They've always been listed as managers before. And I think that goes way back into history when I think the manager was even the secretary of the club and used to do the administration, and then gradually that was whittled away, and then he concentrated on the team. And I think one thing that Arne Slot has to live up to coming to Anfield is the aura that many of his predecessors have had and the accomplishments that they have made at Anfield.
Yeah, let alone coming after Jurgen, right?
Yeah. Oh yes. I mean, Jurgen Klopp in his day had to go through this himself, and so I think I think there's a couple of things generally about Liverpool Football Club. I think one is the Kop, Anfield on European nights, and another thing is the great managers that Liverpool have had. Not all of them have been great, as I think that we'll discuss, but I think Bill Shankly is where modern Liverpool began. He took over before even I was interested in football in 1959, and actually historically they had tried to get him several years beforehand, and he refused to go to Liverpool even though he wanted to go because he knew the potential of the club. And the reason was because in those days the board of directors used to pick the team. And right. Bill Shankly was adamant he did not want to be in that kind of environment. And so he went to several other clubs, and he finally settled on Huddersfield Town, where players that would subsequently go on to be greats, like Dennis Law, who played for Manchester United, and Ray Wilson, who played across the park at Everton and was England's left back in the 66 World Cup final. They all played for Shankly over at Huddersfield Town. But finally, after a series of years where Liverpool were in the second division, the Championship as they call it now, and coming close every year to promotion but not quite making it, the board kind of relented and Shankly came up, joined the club. And it took time, but he certainly changed Liverpool Football Club into what we know today.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mentioned the board of directors picked the players, and there's a famous saying by an old American football coach that said, if you want me to cook the meal, you at least got to let me pick the rest of the ingredients, right?
Right.
So it makes a ton of sense that Bill Shankly had a little, he understood that more than anything, which is pretty interesting. When you look at the stuff he's won, it's a lot, a total of 10 titles. 3 Division 1 titles.
Actually, it was 2, and he won a second division title. So, it was 3 league titles from that perspective.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Then this is incorrect here. Okay. 2 FA Cups.
Correct, yeah.
3 Community Shields. And
The UEFA Cup.
UEFA Cup, yep.
Right. So he was the first Liverpool manager to take the Reds into Europe, and he came close a few times. I think I mentioned the historic game with Inter Milan in '65. Mm-hmm. The following year, they made the final of the Cup Winners' Cup, but lost to Borussia Dortmund in Glasgow. Mm-hmm. Before finally, I think they made a couple more semi-finals in various European tournaments before winning the UEFA Cup in 73, I believe it was. Yeah, 73.
And UEFA Cup was the Champions League prior, right?
No. The history of it is there used to be 3 European tournaments. The European Cup was only for the champions of each country.
Got it.
Then the Cup Winners' Cup was for the team that won the national cup in each country. The UEFA Cup, which was originally called the Intercities First Cup, was for the next 2 or 3 teams that were in the league. And actually, one thing that was interesting was arguably the UEFA Cup had stronger fields than the European Cup at the time, and in essence, the Champions League combined the European Cup and the UEFA Cup.
Got it. Okay. So that's interesting history. Okay. So the European Cup was the Champions League prior, and it was simply for the top team?
It was just the only the top team, then the second, third, fourth team would go into the UEFA Cup.
Oh, okay. So I can see why you would say that the UEFA Cup was arguably stronger competition because you have...
Right, there was a lot more depth. There was a lot more depth to it. And then you might get a situation where a team would win the league one year and then would have an off year the next year. So So yeah, that's the way that it was back then. And of course, we have the Champions League now.
Yeah. So we've talked about Bill Shankly in the past, specifically on the show episode that you were kind of recounting the history of Liverpool. And is there anything else to say about Bill Shankly other than he changed the trajectory of our beloved Liverpool club?
Well, he was just one of the most charismatic managers that I think there's ever been in the English game. I say the English game, he was a Scotsman, an enduring Scotsman at times, but he, I suppose in the modern age, if he lived in this era, he would be great for the soundbite. Because he has many legendary sayings, and there's many anecdotes about Shankly and the things he did and so on and so forth. So he's just one of those figures. And I think one thing that's different about then and now is whilst we would see Bill Shankly on TV, and I mean, even if you think about the game worldwide, think about the greats like Pele and Maradona, we would see them on TV, but we just wouldn't see them as much. And so Shankly and all these personalities that were in the game have a much greater aura about them because there's a little bit of mystery. There's a little bit of mystery about them. We kind of know them, but we don't know them. Not so with the stars of today because there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, X as it's now called. There's all these different social media platforms. And so there's not that same sense of mystery, as it were, to all these characters that inhabit the game. But I think Shankly, out of all of Liverpool's managers, deserves the title of legend. Absolutely no question about that.
Yeah, 783 games. He had a 52% win percentage and 10 cups. So that's pretty good.
And keep in mind that when he took over the club, that the stadium was run down and it took a few years for him. There were many players that he wanted to sign, but the board wouldn't sign them. People like Jackie Charlton and Brian Clough, they wouldn't stump up the money. And that changed when they brought in a director who was also, shall we say, quite in adept at money. He was an accountant, and he made it work so that Liverpool could sign Ron Yates and Ian St. John, and that certainly got the Shankly years moving.
So 15 full years, it's pretty impressive. So from Shankly, we moved to Bob Paisley, and Bob Paisley had 20 cups, but by then, Shankly had kind of set the stage for him, is the way I'm looking at this.
Right. So I think one thing that we kind of went through this year was the shock when Jurgen Klopp said he was leaving. We went through that when Bill Shankly left. And it came at the end of the year, like they just won the FA Cup in 1974. And so he was in a good place. The team was good. They finished second in the league that year, so they were strong. And then out of nowhere, he left. And it really did feel like the end of the world. Paisley was part of the boot room, as they called it. There was himself, Ruben Bennett, Joe Fagan, Ronnie Moran. Some of these would eventually move on to the hot seat at Anfield. And it was a shock. And Bob Paisley, I said Shankly could be a dour Scotsman. Well, I described Bob Paisley as an even more dour Geordie from the northeast, Newcastle area. And he didn't have the personality of Bill Shankly. Bill Shankly was larger than life, and Bob Paisley was at the other end of the spectrum. And I can recall that the first season that Liverpool were in charge, they didn't win anything I think they might have come second in the league, but I can remember thinking, I don't think Paisley's quite up to it. Kind of close but no cigar.
Mm-hmm.
I was wrong. What I understand is that while Paisley didn't have the charisma of Shankly, he was pretty shrewd when it came down to dealing with players and the tactics of the game. And the next year, it was a very exciting finish to the season, and not like it is now where everybody finishes at the same time. That year was between Liverpool and Queen's Park Rangers, and Queen's Park Rangers finished the season before Liverpool, and they were ahead of Liverpool in the league. Liverpool had to go to Wolves to complete the season. It was a few days later, might even been a week later, I'm not sure now. But they had to win. They had to win to take the title. But the interesting thing was Wolves had to win to prevent from being relegated.
Oh, so very important game,
so
both ways.
There was lots of stake that day. So back then, football wasn't live on television. So I can recall, I was at university by then, so I was listening to the game on the radio, and then the news came on, and so they mentioned the Liverpool game, and actually Wolves scored very early on, and were winning 1-0, and so they actually showed the goal on TV in the news. It was a breakaway, as I recall, and a fellow called Steve Kimden, very, very fast player, scored for Wolves. So they were winning 1-0. And in the second half, listening to the game, and Liverpool were absolutely hammering on the door, and it just wouldn't go in. And it was all down the Wolves end. Wolves were hanging on, and finally, I think it was maybe between 10 to 15 minutes before time, Liverpool scored to equalise. And after that, it was like the dam broke, and Liverpool ended up winning 3-1. And of course, when they showed it later on the news, as soon as the game was over, the crowd absolutely spills over onto the pitch. And of course, I had a couple of friends that were in the crowd that night, and of course, the field is totally covered with Liverpool fans, and it was just a great night. It was a great night. And they followed that up by winning the UEFA Cup again in very, very dramatic fashion. And again, not live on television. So the first leg, they were playing Bruges of Belgium, and they were losing 2-0. Before one of those classic European Anfield nights, Liverpool come back to win 3-2. And over in Belgium, it was a draw. So Paisley equaled the Shankly accomplishment of 73, where he got the double of the UEFA Cup and the league. Yeah, it was a great season.
So Bob Paisley had 535 games managed in a 9-year span, it looks like, and almost 58% win percentage. And it looks like him and Klopp had a 60%, almost 61% winning percentage, from a winning percentage, are the biggest, are the greatest Liverpool managers from that standpoint. I like how you talk about the boot room, and then the next guy that came up was Joe Fagan, and you also mentioned Ronnie Moran, who was a caretaker a little bit further down the line. What do you remember about Joe Fagan?
Actually, the biggest thing I remember about Joe was his son, because right around the time that he was manager, I took my A license with the Football Association, and Joe's son, Chris was his name, but everybody called him Kit, was my roommate. And what was interesting was by this time, I'd taken all my coaching licenses, and the first licenses I took with the Welsh FA, and during this late 70s into the 80s era, Liverpool became dominant in a way that no other team had been in England previously. and they had a very definite style. I guess it was an early form of possession football for England. And a couple of things that I remember was when I took the A license with the Welsh FA, the national team manager, Mike Smith, talked about Liverpool and their ability to score late goals, because they were so fit and how they possessed the ball, made the other team work. And then they would, late in the game, they would come through. By the time that Joe Fagan was there, was another kind of football growing within the English game, and that was typified by a fellow called Charlie Hughes, who was running the A license course for Kit and I that year, and his kind of football was the very direct style that was typified by clubs like Wimbledon. But he would play the ball up to the far post and very, very direct football, very few passes, get the ball into the other half. And so one thing that I distinctly remember was because of the Liverpool connection with Kit, that they were totally always trying to say, oh, that's not the best way to play. This is the best way to play. And so Joe Fagan certainly kept on what his predecessor Bob Paisley had done, and I believe in his first season they actually got a treble. Wow. Liverpool, for many years, Liverpool didn't take the League Cup seriously, and that changed in the 80s because I think they won it for like 4 years on the trot. And in Fagan's first year, they won the League Cup. Very famous game. It was the first Merseyside derby for a final, although it was settled in the replay at Old Trafford. And they also won the league. And I think we talked about the European Cup final in Rome, where they beat Rome on their own ground by penalty kicks. Mm-hmm. So he certainly kept the ball rolling. He certainly kept the ball rolling. And these were great years for Liverpool.
Coach, when you look back at these times and how closely related to the manager you were by being a roommate with his son, when you look back at that, you must look at it and smile and say, you were pretty connected to, to the manager and to the club.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, over the years, I've had several contacts with the club, and I've never been to the academy at Kirby, but prior to that, I did have some contact with that and Steve Highway and what have you. But yeah, so yes and no. I think that we all feel connected to Liverpool Football Club. It's just that kind of a club.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same for Evertonians with their club, and maybe all the fans up and down the land, I don't know, feel that way about their local club. But people from Liverpool always say there's something special about the city, and I'm not going to dispute that.
Yeah, there you go. So after Joe Fagan was Kenny Dalglish's first stint with Liverpool, and I misspoke. He's actually the top from a winning percentage at 60.91. Klopp is 60.90, and then we have Bob Paisley at 57. 57.
Okay. I didn't know that. That Dalglish had the biggest winning percentage. Is that just based on his first period as manager?
Yes. Yeah, just on his first period. Yep.
Right.
With a second period, I could do some math in a little bit, but yeah, his first period from May of 85 to February of 91, 307 matches, and it looks like nine titles.
Right.
I mean, there's a period here from Paisley to Dalglish that you're looking at 42 cups in a period of 59 to 90, 42 years. I mean, that's basically one a year.
So what period was that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so from Shankly, from 1959 to
right.
Kenny Dalglish, 1991, that's 42 years, and they won 42 titles in the 42 cups in that time frame. I mean, so the winning, this is the biggest period of winning for the club. I mean, it's a big time frame. So pretty impressive that when you look at it, the winning DNA was kind of really cemented there.
It was, and even though they may have not won as many trophies since, I mean, like they're always in contention. And As I think we said at the start, it was Bill Shankly that changed the whole trajectory of the club, and Kenny Dalglish, he maintained it. He was slightly different from his predecessors in that he was not a part of the boot room. He was a player, and I would guess that the reason he became the manager was obviously he had some kind of aura about him. I think that within the context of the club overall, many regard him as the greatest ever player that Liverpool had. And he's certainly up there. I don't think anybody can dispute that. And, he was another one of these canny Scots who had instant success. He had a good team. He had a good squad at his disposal. And actually, he played in that first season as well because they won the double. And the goal that clinched the league at Chelsea was an absolute classic from Kenny Dalglish. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, I haven't. I'm gonna.
Well, check it out.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube where the ball is chipped, crossed into the far post area. He's running in. He controls it on his chest and volleys it into the far corner. It's a great goal. It really is, and so. It was a memorable first season for Kenny Dalglish. And then the next season is like the big rivals at the time were across Stanley Park, were Everton. And so they pipped Everton to the league and also the FA Cup that year. The next season, Everton won the league. Liverpool didn't win anything. And actually that was the year that Ian Rush had his finals. Well, it wasn't his final season, but his final season at that time. Liverpool didn't win anything that year. And then the following season, they went out and they bought John Barnes. And they also bought a replacement for Kenny Dalglish with a local lad, John Aldridge. Mm-hmm. And some say that the Liverpool team that year was the best ever. Like they romped to the title and were famously denied the double by the crazy gang of Wimbledon in the FA Cup final. But it was a great team. It was a great team with another one of the greats coming in the form of John Barnes.
Yeah, John Barnes. Was he the Jamaican fellow?
He was of Jamaican heritage.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So Liverpool actually has a massive following in Jamaica because of John Barnes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
I know a couple myself, and when I asked them, why'd you pick Liverpool? It's John Barnes. So, yeah, pretty interesting. So after Dalglish in 1991, there was a caretaker, Ronnie Moran, who you mentioned was part of the boot room, just for a couple months, it seems like.
Yeah, Ronnie Moran. I mean, again, there was a shock. Kind of the Dalglish era, his first era, changed direction after Hillsborough disaster. And it seemed to take its toll on him, and he suddenly resigned. and Ronnie Moran took over. And Ronnie Moran was initially a player for many years. Then he became part of the backroom staff, and he was kind of known as being the tough guy. He was the guy that certainly say during the Paisley and Fagan era, they were kind of more quietly spoken, and Ronnie Moran would be the man to give the players a kick up the backside, as it were, if things weren't going to plan or they needed to be brought down to earth. Because it's said that whenever they won a trophy, the first thing that Ronnie Moran would say is, right, that's it for this year. Now we start working for next year. So that's the kind of personality that he was, and he kept the seat warm for a couple of months before Liverpool did something similar but different to Dalglish. They brought in another former player in Graham Souness, who was a great midfielder for Liverpool, just as Dalglish had been a great striker. Souness had been away from Anfield for a number of years. After the '84 European Cup final, he went to play in Italy for Sampdoria, and subsequently moved to Glasgow Rangers. It was at the time that the English clubs were banned from European competition. And he went up to Scotland to Glasgow Rangers, and initially was a player manager, as Dalglish had been at Anfield. And because the English teams were out of European competition, brought a lot of English players up to play in Scotland, and had great success. He had great success. And I suppose the feeling was that even though he'd been away from Liverpool, he'd shown he had ability as a manager, so he was brought back to Anfield. And I think it's fair to say that his time was different from Shankly, Paisley, Fagan, and Dalglish. His time was very different.
Yeah, the winning percentage is 42% for Graham Souness. So I think that's what you're referring to.
Well, it's a little harder for me to recount these Souness years because it coincides with, I was in America, we didn't have the internet. And so I would read the newspapers, say 3-4 days after they were published in England, and same with the soccer publications. Everything would be behind what it was in the UK. And apparently Souness came in and he tried to make a lot of changes. The game was starting to change, and I believe he felt that Liverpool was starting to show signs of falling behind. This is just pre-Premier League era. So he shipped out a lot of, he brought in players, he shipped them out as well. So there was a lot of in and out. He tried to change some of the training regimes. And I believe he says now that he tried to do too much too soon. And so it created a lot of uncertainty at Anfield. And Liverpool still had a good team, like they won the FA Cup under him. But they kind of lost the edge that they had under his predecessors. Though I believe he can be credited for the fact that he really started to bring in some of the top academy players at the time. I think McManaman had his debut under Dalglish, but he was really given a major role under Graham Souness. Robbie Fowler was another one that first came into the team at this time. So I think he was only there for 3 seasons, was it? Something like 3 seasons.
Yeah, 2.5. It looked 3.5. Yeah.
Yeah. So he also had some heart issues as well, and so it wasn't as smooth as it had been previously. And I think it might have been. I think the death knell for him was they lost to Crystal Palace in the League Cup. I think it was the League Cup. And it had too many results where things hadn't gone well, and I think there was just a feeling all around of dissatisfaction. So they made the decision to bring in Roy Evans, who'd been part of the boot room. Evans had been a player at Liverpool, but had never really played to any great degree. But from the get-go, had shown promise as a manager, potentially. He'd taken the reserve team for many years, and in those days, the structure of the game was very different because there was a lot more emphasis placed upon the reserves. Whilst it was a first-team squad, if you weren't playing on Saturday, then you were probably going to play for the reserves instead. So under Evans, I'm not sure how many years in a row that they won the Central League, which is what the reserve teams played in, but it was pretty much through the 70s, like they dominated, like the first team dominated in the league. So he was put in the hot seat, and instantly, I think that what Evans did was he focused the team more. There wasn't as much chopping and changing, and that first season, I believe they won the League Cup. Everything was moving in the right direction. In 95, 96, you could say arguably they had the best team, but Manchester United won the double that year, including beating Liverpool in the FA Cup final. And it was Eric Cantona that scored the winning goal. And Liverpool didn't have a player like Cantona, and they didn't have a player like Peter Schmeichel in goal, because I think that those were the main reasons. Like, they had the Beckham group, they had the class of 92, but I think if you'd have taken those two away, I don't think that United would have had that success. Liverpool's season boiled down to they had an absolutely disastrous November that year. I think they lost pretty much every game, and they were never able to quite make it up, even though they had a good team and they played good football at times. And Fowler and McManaman, who'd come through at Souness, were now major players for the team. And that was also the year of Stan Collymore. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yeah. He had a very good season. He had a good partnership up front with Fowler, and it was another classic game, the 4-3 over Newcastle. And even though Liverpool didn't win anything that year, they were still an excellent team under Evans. But they fell short, and slowly but surely after that, it was like they peaked under Evans, and then slowly but surely they started to lose ground again, even though they remained competitive for the next year or two. And so that ultimately led to Liverpool deciding that, or maybe recognizing that some of their methods and the boot room was from another era. And so they made a decision that at the time seemed strange, and in hindsight remains strange. And they brought in the French FA director of coaching, Gerard Houllier. They brought him into the club, but initially he and Roy Evans were supposed to be joint managers, with the idea being that you would get the best of both worlds. You get the best of the boot room with the best of the way that the game was developing these days. And it never worked.
Yeah, lasted 18 games.
Yeah. I mean, how can you, basically who picks the team? And there were just too many issues. And Roy Evans very graciously stepped aside. Gerard Houllier, I don't believe was a footballer to any great degree, but has an association with the club going back to the 60s when he was a school teacher on exchange in the Merseyside area.
Really?
And that's where he developed his love for Liverpool Football Club.
Wow.
And obviously made his way in the French game, because France for a while was in the doldrums football wise, and then he was part of the renovation of the game in that country. He was national team manager for a while, and as I said, became the director of coaching. So he ultimately took over solely when Evans stepped to the side. And he had some rebuilding to do. He had some rebuilding because I think unquestionably Manchester United were the major force in the English game. And down in London, Arsenal had gone through their own change as well, and had a Frenchman at the the helm. So Liverpool had to change, and I guess Houllier was the road that they chose to take it with.
It's interesting that he joined the team in July of '98, which is when France won the World Cup for the first time.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it was before or after. I have a feeling it was after that. So Houllier had a part in building the French game. He'd also been manager in '94 when they hadn't qualified. And I don't know the full story, but they were very close to qualifying. And I'm blanking on the name of the French winger who played for Newcastle and Tottenham. He's a great player. And I just got, I'm scrambling for his name, but apparently he did something that Houllier didn't like, and it led to the opponent scoring a goal, and basically France didn't qualify for the World Cup. But after that, he stepped to the side, became director of coaching, and many of the great French players came through his era.
Yeah, that was a golden era of the French team. It was with Zidane leading the charge.
Of course, yeah.
The player.
Yeah.
So, under Houllier, it looks like 307 games played, 52.12 win percentage, and 6 cups. So, 1 FA Cup, 2 League Cups, 1 Charity Shield, and
European Super Cup.
Super Cup.
Yeah. I mean, the 2000-2001 season was just an incredible year for Liverpool, because it had taken him a couple of years to kind of build a squad. And that year they won both of the domestic cups, and they won a European Cup as well. They won the UEFA Cup. And I think that's the only time in the history of the English game that one team has won every cup in the same season. I think that's the only time it's ever happened. And there were just so many great games that year. So many memories. The Michael Owen Cup final being one, and then that's a UEFA Cup final with over the Spanish team Alaves 4-3, another classic game, and it was a really fun team. It was a fun team because you had up front, you had a choice of Fowler, Owen, Emil Heskey, and he also had Jari Litmanen, who was maybe on the decline in his career, but still had some moments when he came in and played, and that was a fun team. That was a really fun team to watch.
Yeah. And after Gerard Houllier, there's a Spanish manager, Rafa Benitez.
Rafa Benitez, took over from Houllier, and story has it that they were considering Mourinho.
Oh, wow.
And they were considering Benitez. The players wanted Benitez because his Valencia team had eliminated them from a European competition, and the players felt that they couldn't get anywhere near Valencia. They were so well organized, and he was the choice of the players. The irony being that when he took over, that whereas his predecessor Gerard Houllier had, he was very close with the players. Benitez was not. He was more, he was all business basically. And I think pre-Klopp, I would rate him the best manager of the Premier League era. And what he did well was season by season. I think Jurgen Klopp had a better situation, in terms of the ownership. When he came in, FSG knew the English game and were prepared to support him. I don't think Benitez had that support, because over 4 years, he won. Well, obviously there was Istanbul for a start, but I think in 2008 and 2009, Liverpool had an excellent team. They were a phenomenal team, but they were pipped to the title by Manchester United, even though they beat United twice. And if you look at the games, Liverpool only lost twice that year, but they drew a lot of games. They just didn't have the same depth of squad as Manchester United. Up front, they had Torres, and they had Gerrard. And again, if you analyse the games, both Gerrard and Torres missed a lot of games that year. And they only played together a few times. Well, I don't even think it's half of the games. But Liverpool just didn't have the depth of Manchester United. Plus, Manchester United had the experience of winning the title. But there was one memorable week that year, which you may or may not recall, where Liverpool stuck 4 past Real Madrid at Anfield, and then the following weekend went down to Old Trafford and stuck another 4 past Manchester United. And I always felt that Benitez got some of the pundits. For some reason, he was never liked by the pundits, and they always accused him of playing defensively. And I think he's the classic case of a manager that builds a team from the back. But for me, building a team from the back is fine. If you're always going to play defensive, I think that's another issue. Because certainly that team that's had Gerrard and Torres, they were a very good team going forward. An excellent team. But sadly for Benitez, it was the era of the first American ownership. And the club in the background was in turmoil, so they were never able to build upon the peak of the Benitez years. And so it soon went downhill, and then Benitez left.
Yeah, and he was replaced by Roy Hodgson. But, well, first of all, Benitez had 350 games played. Or managed, I guess he didn't play, and 55.43 win percentage, which is pretty good. And obviously, good, yeah. Istanbul. I mean, he'll forever be remembered for that. And I had a question about him when you mentioned the Bob Paisleys and Joe Fagans of the world here. Is there any other manager that kind of stood out? Like that was similar to Benitez? Because you mentioned Paisley was really good with the players. And when we first started talking about him and you started mentioning he was a little bit different. And I remember him being, not very excitable and not very emotional in games.
Right. He was very stoic. He was very stoic on the side.
Yeah. And does he compare to anybody else we've had? At first I was thinking, Paisley, but then I remembered you mentioned, Paisley was good with the players, so I don't know if it was an all business kind of thing.
Well. When I say he was good with the players, Paisley, apparently he was very ruthless. When I say he was good with the players, it wasn't the same way as Houllier. I think Houllier was more the kind of guy that would put his arm around the player.
Like Klopp. Yeah.
Be like that. Paisley was good at knowing when when a player had peaked and was going downhill, as it were, and he was good at picking players for particular matches and things like that. And I suppose he would be similar to Benitez, in some of those respects.
Okay. All right, and then Roy Hodgson for looks like. Half a year.
It wasn't that long, and basically it was
a caretaker role.
It was the American. No. He was appointed manager, but the first American owners had fallen out. Had fallen out with Benitez, and I'd met Rafael Benitez, and he told me that they thought, that they looked at Liverpool and talked about it as though it was a franchise, and he had to tell them it's not a franchise. And so when Benitez left, Roy Hodgson had been down at Fulham, and they just had a great run in the Europa League and made the final, which was a big accomplishment, and he had quite a varied CV, his resume. He coached all over the world, the World Cup and Inter Milan and all this kind of stuff. But whilst I think that we could say that there's a great deal of respect for Roy Hodgson and the longevity of his career, the fan base, and I know that I never thought he was a good match for Liverpool, and I would rate his period as the lowest ebb, as it were, in the tide. Certainly in those years that I followed the Reds, it just never worked, and he just couldn't connect with the fans in any way. I mean, I think every other manager before him had connected in one way or another. Mm-hmm. But Roy Hodgson may be a nice guy, but he just didn't connect. Liverpool lost to Everton in a derby 2-0, and he said it was Liverpool's best performance of the season, and that did not go down well. And then, some of the little things, he's very friendly with Alex Ferguson. That did not go down well. So he was always, I suppose, on a hiding to nothing. And Liverpool had some miserable performances. They got knocked out of the League Cup by a League Two team on penalty kicks, Northampton Town. And I can remember watching some of the games, and Liverpool were absolutely dreadful. So he didn't last long, and by this time FSG had come in, and I think their first thought was, well, let's keep continuity to some degree. Let's not make too many changes, but the cry was just too loud, and the results were just too poor, and a change had to be made.
Well, speaking of continuity, bringing Kenny back in would make sense to kind of bring excitement and, a Liverpool legend to kind of help them kind of pull out of this little funk they were in. And King Kenny was there from January 8th, 2011 to the end of the following season. And
well, it worked.
Yeah.
It worked because from the start, I mean, one of his earliest games was against Manchester United, and I think, I can't remember the exact timing, but I think they fired Hodgson. Dalglish came in, and that January window is when they brought in Carroll and Suarez. and they played Manchester United, and Dirk Kuyt scored a hat-trick. I don't know if you remember that game, but just a few months earlier, that would never have happened. Liverpool under Dalglish were revitalised. The crowd were behind them again. And even though he was only there for like a season and a half, he did a lot of good things to get Liverpool back on the rails. I felt sorry for Dalglish because, in hindsight, it's very clear that FSG saw him as a stopgap. They wanted to bring in their own man, as it were, because the following season, I can't remember where Liverpool finished in the league, but they made both cup finals. They won the League Cup final, and then they lost to Chelsea in the FA Cup final. And then subsequently, they decided to make a change. And personally, my feeling at the time, my memory is that the second half of the season, whilst Liverpool did well in the cups, they didn't play particularly well. That is my memory of that period. But I would have given him another season based on the cup performances. But FSG changed, and in comes Brendan Rodgers, who, to be honest with you, was another guy that I didn't feel was a Liverpool manager. Don't know what your thoughts were, because these are seasons that you.
I do, yeah. And he came in from Celtic, right?
No, he had been. Celtic was later in his career. He came from Swansea.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Swansea had been in the Premier League, and he'd gone down to Swansea. He'd done pretty well, but he inherited a team that had been built by previous managers, and it was a good team. And he kind of kept the ball rolling, as it were. And my feeling when he was appointed was he just wasn't experienced enough for a club like Liverpool. But I could understand in some ways why FSG wanted him, because he kind of ticked the boxes for a lot of the new approach. So apparently he had some kind of presentation that he gave them, PowerPoint presentation. Of course, I don't think we'd have had PowerPoint in the days of Shankly and Paisley and company. So this was impressive to FSG, and they put him in charge, and then they did something that didn't work at the time. I should really go and watch it again, but they made a documentary, Being Liverpool.
Yeah,
I don't know if you ever watched it.
I did. I don't. You're right. It's kind of obscure now to me, though, but I remember watching it.
Yeah. And Brendan Rodgers didn't impress me at all in that documentary. He might have impressed other people, but I just felt he was too full of himself. And anyway, looking at his time, I mean, to be fair to him, I think he's a good coach. I think he's a good coach, but he has a couple of major weaknesses. And I know the players seem to like him, and that's not just at Liverpool, but other places he's coached at. So again, kudos to Brendan Rodgers if he's got the players behind him. But his major weaknesses were shown at Anfield, and he had the fantastic season where he had that group of players. He had Gerrard, maybe not at his pomp, but in the middle, directing. He had young players like Coutinho coming through, Sterling coming through, very talented, fearless players. And he had Luis Suarez, who may have only been at Anfield for a short period of time, but I will put him in my top 11 any day of the week. He was an awesome player, truly was. But Liverpool at the back were not good. And it had a little bit of even though they had some players that had been signed by Benitez, they didn't have the organisation that Benitez had. Plus, he got rid of Pepe Reina, one of Liverpool's best ever goalkeepers. Legend has it because Reina had wanted Benitez to come back, and Reina was vastly superior to Mignolet, who Mignolet, very good shot stopper, but I wouldn't rate him as an all-round goalkeeper. And so the Brendan Rodgers year, like they had that fantastic season and they just fell short. Liverpool were not good in Europe. Liverpool's record under Rodgers in Europe was dreadful. And he's never done particularly well since, Celtic and Leicester and what have you. So yeah, he was very, very close. But as with Evans and I suppose Benitez, they knocked on the door. They almost got through the door, but then afterwards, when they did, there was a quick decline, and that's happened with Rodgers, which led to a Bill Shankly Mark II coming through. Jurgen Klopp, who had. When you look at Jurgen Klopp, he maybe had the best composite of all of these great Liverpool managers. He had charisma, he had the tactical know-how. Players loved him, and we've talked about him before, so I don't think we have to say too much about the Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp era. Yeah. He was just awesome guy, awesome manager, great Liverpool team. The best Liverpool team of my lifetime.
Yeah, I remember when he was hired, and there was a lot of fanfare even before Brandon Rodgers kind of slipped up in October, because Jurgen Klopp was going to take a sabbatical, as he was saying, from Borussia Dortmund, and then you kind of, that's when really, like, in 2015, 2016, when all the leagues kind of opened up, you could kind of see a lot of games from different leagues. And I remember watching a Borussia Dortmund game and being like, oh, they're like Liverpool. Like the You'll Never Walk Alone. The stadium is rocking. The flags are flying. So Klopp famously said that when I think they played Liverpool at Anfield, that if there was a club that he'd want to manage after that, it would be Liverpool. And I mean, it was almost like a done deal. Even, he was just kind of waiting in the wings for Brandon to kind of screw up. It kind of seemed like, and Jurgen had an amazing tenure, and we have spoken about that. So let's skip to Arne now. When Jeff and I were talking last week, we just, we couldn't kind of say it enough that we don't really need anybody. And the reason there are no transfers in is because the evaluation process of a new manager has to be there, and he wants to evaluate everybody. So, Coach, you and I spoke about us having to be patient with him because of how this summer is working out with the Copa America and the European Championship, and us having a lot of players in both tournaments. So a lot of them had to rest and, get a vacation in too. And now, they're in the U.S. They played in Pittsburgh on, was that Saturday? Friday, sorry. And they play Arsenal on Wednesday. So we'll get to see a little bit more. These games, unfortunately, aren't very predictive of how a manager is going to perform. But you mentioned Brandon Rodgers and maybe not having the pedigree to manage Liverpool. Do you kind of have the same feeling with Arne Slot, or because he did some things with Feyenoord in the Dutch league that maybe this guy can pull it off?
Yeah, I think he has a bit more pedigree than Brendan Rodgers, but he's an unknown. One thing that I would parallel for him with Klopp and Benitez is Benitez with Valencia, Klopp with Dortmund, and then Slot with Feyenoord. They all won the league over the dominant teams within their system, and so they have the ability to do that. So that's one thing that's similar. I think that where it's harder for him is he's an unknown quantity in terms of Benitez came from La Liga, Klopp came from the Bundesliga, and those are highly rated European leagues. The Dutch league is maybe a level below. So I think that's one thing that he's going to have to overcome to some degree. And I think some of the circumstances right now are also difficult in as much as he's taking over from a legend. Always going to be hard for anybody. And there's a degree of negativity from the fan base right now. It's not aimed at him, it's aimed at the ownership because of the lack of perceived activity in the transfer market. Because if you look at Old Trafford, I mean, I've had problems in recent years with transfers and the transfer policy. They seem to be making good moves, especially as one player that they signed, Euro, was supposedly on Liverpool's radar. And I mean, even across the park at Everton, they've had some tough times. Even they've been active in the transfer market. And Liverpool, at this moment in time, seems more interested in adding to their academy than adding to the first team. So I think fans will always have a problem with that. And all of a sudden, if Liverpool's not having good results, that'll bring negativity, and it may be with the owners at first, but eventually it'll always trickle down to the manager.
Yeah, but
I think that Liverpool will sign a couple of players, but I'd be very surprised if somebody like Nico Williams ends up at Liverpool. I don't think they'll be buying a player like that.
Yeah, Richard Hughes, has said it in his press conference that they're looking to be opportunistic. Lenny Euro at almost 60 million is way too much for an 18-year-old that has talent obviously, but plays in Ligue 1, and that's not quite the Premier League. And when you really, I understand Liverpool's frustrations. It's fun to have a new guy to talk about. It's a lot of fun to kind of speculate and to dream about players coming in. But when you actually go through the exercise and you look through the teams, like Jeff and I did, there's really not that much needed. And especially if one of our bigger players isn't going out, then it's, you really look at the academy, and then you look at the players, and you look at the, the starters and the people that'll be on the squad, but maybe not play as much. It's a pretty good team. Yeah.
It's a good squad. But at the same time, I think it's always good to bring in a couple of players. It just stimulates the group in a different way. So I think the Liverpool will sign a player or two, but it's not going to be the banner player that maybe the fans would crave. And I think it's all part of the process of integrating the new guy at the helm, because he'll look at his troops and he'll decide who's for him. Maybe some aren't for him, and there's also a business side to it as well. Because think about it, like they've taken 28 players on tour to the States, and there's another 12 that aren't involved. So that's 40 players. And so there's also players going to be going out anyway because there's too many.
Right. And
from a business point of view, and even though we don't like to hear it, I mean, it brings in revenue. So,
yeah, which isn't very exciting for us, but it's part of it.
Yeah, it's not very exciting, but yeah. I mean, that's how you run a club. So,
we're hoping for the best, but I think, Coach, we've been kind of right on it with, having to be patient and understanding that the squad is really, really good. And it's interesting to see what cuts he wants to make, so to speak, as far as, guys that he thinks can make it. One guy that I thought, was hearing a lot of good news about was Sepp Vandenberg, and watching him play it was one game. He wasn't particularly impressive, so I'm interested in watching him play again on Wednesday against Arsenal, just to see. Or is that Manchester? Is it Manchester on Wednesday or Arsenal Wednesday?
No, we play Arsenal next.
So I'm curious to watch him play against a Premier League opposition and see how he does, because he got off to a rough start against Real Betis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for going down memory lane with these coaches and, some of the things that you remember, and always great to kind of talk a little bit of the history with you. And, Liverpool fans, let's be patient. We have a new guy. We have a good team. It's gonna, we've had a lot of tournaments over the summer that we haven't even got guys back yet. So let's be patient. Let's give this guy a real shot, and let's get behind the team like we always do. All right, everybody, great. Take care, and we will catch you next time.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Liverpool fans, thank you so much for listening to the Liverpool Reaction, an American LFC podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and would greatly appreciate your support. Please leave a 5-star review, and feel free to email us at tlrlfcpodcast@gmail.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. Till next time.